Hi, everyone. In week 3, Pastor Chris shared with us a phenomenal truth. Growth isn't about knowing, it's about becoming. We want to become more like God's Son. This week, one of our elders, Justin Michael, is going to share with us how we practically can take step towards that together as a dinner group and as a church.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin. For those of you who do know me, my name is still Justin. It doesn't change because you became my friend. Anyway, I'm looking forward to spending this time with you. I know I always like to get to know people a little bit, so I'm going to count down from 3, and then everyone is going to say their favorite food. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1, pizza! Oh, well, that was awesome. I feel like I know you guys better already. Okay, that was silly, but I hope you laughed with me. Today, our hope is to discuss practices that we have developed at Hoboken Grace, collectively called rhythms. We develop these practices as we journey into an awakening to the reality revealed by a phrase said by the Apostle Paul to the Athenians. In the book of Acts, Luke records in chapter 7, Paul says this, "For in him we live and move and have our being." And we believe that this journey on is about awakening to this truth, that God is present in all aspects of our lives, that our lives are dependent upon him, and as a result, we can connect with him in all of our circumstances. When we connect with God, we awaken to his presence in our circumstances, we remember all that he is doing for us, in us, and through us, and we're able to experience his power and his peace in our circumstances and develop real intimacy with Christ. Developing our ability to know God and to experience God will help us to develop that intimacy with Christ. You see, the Apostle Paul wrote to the Philippians and he said, "Whatever were gains for me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. And what is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them all garbage that I may gain Christ." That was Philippians chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. Paul is saying that having God be our central focus in our lives is Paul's highest goal, and he invites us to be our highest goal. So as we look at these practices, we need to remember 2 important truths. The first is that this is a process. It isn't that we have already arrived or that we've accomplished anything, but that we are making progress as we take steps. Paul wrote to Timothy saying, "For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come." Paul is acknowledging that we have to train ourselves, that this isn't handed to us without effort on our part. The second thing about this practice is that they are not ends to themselves. These practices are to help us experience the presence, power, and love of God, to help us live inside of this principle, that in God we live and move and have our being. The next 2 things I want to acknowledge is that we have 2 disabilities when it comes to this practice. The first is that we easily forget. When I asked you what your favorite food was, some of you had to think for a minute. Some of you still aren't sure. Sometimes when I go to a restaurant, I'll ask my wife something like, "Do I like the way they make shawarma in this restaurant? I can't even remember if I like the food in this place." We see our inability to remember in so many different ways. And God constantly is telling us over and over and over again throughout the scriptures, he's telling us who follow him that we should make ways to remember all the different ways that God has shown us his love. An example of that is when Jesus gave us the practice of communion. It's a practice of remembering. In Luke, we read, he took bread, he gave thanks and broke it, and he gave it to them saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." That was Luke 22, verse 19. Jesus is telling us you need to set up practices to help you to remember. The next limitation that we have to acknowledge is that we're oftentimes blind to the reality around us. There's a lot of things that will influence our blindness. When I was 10, I had this crush on a girl named Michelle. She went to a different school, but we rode the same bus. And I would sit next to her, and we would do the things that 10-year-olds would do. We'd bounce on the seats to see how high we would fly when the bus went over the railroad tracks. We'd look out the window and laugh at the things that make kids laugh. But her older brother noticed this, and he and his friends would mock me and make fun of me. One day, he pinned me up against the side of the bus, telling me that he did not want me to sit near his sister anymore. Big brothers do that. They keep boys away from their sisters. Well, I was scared of Michelle's brother. He was way bigger than me, so I stayed away. A few days later, Michelle said, I don't care. You know what, Justin? I think you're pretty cool. Wow, what an amazing thing she said. But because I was so afraid, I couldn't see the kindness that Michelle was offering. I thought she was mocking me too, so I said something rude in response. My fear prevented me from seeing the truth, that Michelle liked me even if her brother didn't. I didn't see the reality of what was going on because of my fear. There are many different things that might keep us from seeing the reality that in him we move and live and have our being. In fact, it's such an important fact that Paul writes over and over again. In one example, he writes to the Ephesians, he says, I keep asking that the Lord, our God, Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know him better. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you might know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for those who believe. That was Ephesians chapter 1. From this, we can see that Paul realized that we need to be awakened, that our spiritual eyes need to be opened to these truths, to these principles. For many of us, we initially thought that by assenting that Jesus is God, that they should clear up all of these issues. And certainly choosing to follow Jesus and to accept the gift that is available because of what he did for us will help us to take those steps. But the journey does not stop there. Our blindness isn't eliminated when we take that step. And so that we see that this journey is about awakening. It's not about arriving or achieving or accomplishing. God calls us to draw close to him. Jesus told his disciples, I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. It's sometimes hard to admit our weaknesses, our limitations, but not accepting this can prevent us from following Jesus well. The religious leaders of Jesus' times were convinced they were the only ones who understood God, but they failed to see Jesus at work in their very midst, despite the miracles and the teaching and the evidence that he gave them. In fact, at one point, he even said to them, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, Jesus replied. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see. That was John chapter 9. So we must engage this process. Moses told the people of Israel, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your heart. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Using this passage, we've come up with a rhythm for us to follow, a process, a pattern, a practice that helps us to awaken to these principles that in him we live and move and have our being. From these 4 times, when we awaken, when we walk on the road, which we've sort of translated to commute, when we sit at home, which we've sort of converted into when we eat, and when we lie down, we want to use these times, these activities, to remind us to remember God and engage with him. Now, you'll notice that we are moving away from an idea of binging on God. We kind of do that already. We might do that where we just spend time with God on Sunday, and then the rest of the week, we don't spend any time with him. This is moving away from that idea of binging on God and moving towards spending time with him throughout the day. There's other ways that people can do this. Like, honestly, for me, it's hard to wake up and spend 2 hours with God before I go to work. But I want to spend time with him. So these rhythms help me to engage with God throughout the day. Here's the pattern. In the morning, we take time for personal prayer and to read the Bible. Now, during the commute, well, the commute's a little different now, isn't it? But during my commute, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this, I spent time memorizing. At lunch, I spent time looking at the meditation passage. And before bed, I spent time praying for those on the intercessory prayer schedule. So let me talk about each of these practices in turn. The first one I want to talk about is meditation. Now, meditation is something we all do all the time. What meditation is just thinking about something over and over and over again. Now, I don't know how that works out for you. If you worry, that's meditation. You're meditating on the things that's concerning you. If you're like me, I often meditate about things that are going to be happening soon. Like I think in my mind what's going to be happening next, and I sort of rehearse it in my head. What we're doing is we're taking that focus of our attention and we're turning it to the one who loves us the most. And so we can take some time to meditate on a passage. And so every month, we have a passage that we read every day, and we think about that passage throughout the day. Every day. The next thing that we take part in is something called a contemplative question. Now, these are questions that we create that help us engage the passage. It helps us to think through the passage and what could it possibly mean. The questions ask us foundational questions about what is being said in the passage. It's asking us questions about our own response, like how will we respond to that passage? So we have that time for the contemplative question. And this is what you can do during that time of meditation. You just take the questions and you read through them and you read through the passage and you think to yourself, how does this passage reflect in these questions? Also, I find that I oftentimes just take a little portion of the passage and think about that. There might be a sentence or two that draws my attention and I spend more time thinking about that passage. The next thing is a memory verse. Every month we post a memory verse. It's part of the meditation passage, and it's just something to help us to remember the key idea or key thought inside of that passage. The next thing on our rhythms is called the communion practice. This is something that we do where we just spend some time with the passage and we spend some time with God, just remembering what Jesus did on our behalf. Remember how this works out. That we were separated from God. But Jesus came in order that he might bring us into God's family, that we might be able to experience God in this way, that we might be able to know him in this way. And so because of that, we remember what Jesus Christ did on our behalf through the step of communion. We take the bread, we take the cup, and we remember just how far God came in his pursuit of us, that Jesus died for us. Some of the other practices within our rhythms is fasting. When we fast, and we as a church fast once a month, we spend time just remembering what Jesus did on our behalf. We spend time denying food to ourselves, and we take those times when we start thinking, oh, I'm hungry, or I'm really hungry now, and we spend that time with God just to thinking about him. It's just to remind ourselves that our body is not in charge of us, that we get to choose what we're going to do and what we're going to focus our attention on. There's another practice within the rhythms system, and that's just times of solitude. This is just time when you're going to just step away from all the things that can distract us, whether it's your online media or TV or sports or family or books, whatever it is, and we just spend some time quietly with God. You can read through the passage. You can spend time talking to him. Then we also have the reading schedule. Now, the reading schedule is something you can take part in every day. It's just, we'll send you a chapter of the Bible every day, and you can just read that chapter. Nancy and I do this together at breakfast. So we sit down, and one or the other of us will take the chapter for the day, and we'll read it to each other. And then we'll just talk through the passage and say, what was hard about it? What was great about it? What did we hear about it? Sometimes she'll say to me, so any feedback? And I'll be like, I don't know. That's okay. That's okay. The important thing is that we're spending time reading that. You can go to HobokenGrace.com/Bible, and you'll have an opportunity to put in your email address, and we'll send you that chapter starting right now. Part of the reading schedule is live with Anthony and Chris in the morning. And I just want to encourage you that that's something that you can take part in too, where they discuss the passage and talk about their experiences with it as well. And finally, the last thing in our rhythms is intercessory prayer. That's when we'll just take one day, and this is where we'll focus our attention when we talk to God. So on Monday, it's about those who don't know Jesus. On Tuesday, it's family. On Wednesday, it's about the church. On Thursday, it's our dinner groups. On Friday, it's our cities and nation. On Saturday, it's the world. And on Sunday, it's our coworkers. Wow, that's a lot to remember, isn't it? Well, how are you possibly going to remember all of that stuff? Well, here's a couple things that we have available to you. First, we do have the app on our Hoboken Grace app. We do have something called Rhythms. You can tap that, and you'll see the meditation passage for the month. You'll see the memory passage. You'll see the contemplative questions. You'll see what day we're choosing for the fast. And as a result, you can use the Rhythms section on the app to help you remember all of those things. The next thing you can do is you can send up for reminders. So on the Rhythms app, you can get a notification from the app itself that reminds you in the morning, it'll remind you at lunch, and it'll remind you in the evening. And it'll just help you to remember, hey, just take a moment to spend time with the one who loves you the most. I want to talk about 2 other reminders that I use. One is my Outlook calendar at work. Periodically, I go in and I create a private meeting or a private reminder, and I just remind myself, hey, I want to be praying for these people. I want to be praying about this situation. And I just put a reminder on my Outlook, and I just mark it as private so that other people can't see it. And the second thing that I do is my Fitbit. Every hour, it reminds me I should get off my duff and take 250 steps. When I take those 250 steps, I remember I'm going to grab my meditation passage. I'm going to grab my memory verse. I'm going to spend some time talking with God. This is just another thing that I can use that jogs my memory to remind me that in Him we live and move and we have our being. I hope this helps you to awaken to the love that God has for you, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, Justin. I love what he said, awakening to the reality that in Him we live, move, and have our being. The great thing about developing these rhythms is that you don't have to be alone in creating them and learning from them. We don't grow in isolation. This is a great thing for you to discuss as a group. How can your group support each other as you take these steps? Have a great week.